Hi, I'm Andrew Packer, editor of the Credit Crunch Short Report, and I'd like to thank you for opting in and watching this little video for you today. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about the kind of investor you should be at all times, and that is a skeptic. I'm a bit of a skeptic, and most of the people who make money, long or short, are skeptics too. It kind of helps them to know when to get out, when a good stock has had its run, when things aren't starting to look as good as they once were, when they aren't as rosy, despite what management is saying, despite what the shareholders are saying, despite what the talking heads on CNBC are saying. So that said, as a skeptic, what does that mean on the short side? Well, many of the successful short sellers out there go beyond mere skepticism. They read into every detail of every footnote of every prospectus. And that's pretty crazy. In fact, it's very dedicated and not something that the average investor really has time to read through, sort through, mentally digest. But at the very least, you should be skeptical of everything at every time. Sounds like a lot? Not necessarily. One of the biggest areas where the short sellers of the past few years found some of their prime fodder for shorting was simply in being skeptical in the ratings agencies. Now, if you're a regular A-letter reader, you know that we kind of hack on those guys all the time. After all, they really kind of fail to do their job. And that's a very important thing to bear in mind. The ratings agencies are compromised. We've said it before, and we'll say it again. These guys work with investment bankers, they work with pension funds, the big money, and let's face it, they don't want to lose those potentially lucrative deal flows over the next few years, so they have an incentive to give a little, shall we say, grade inflation, to make sure that those bonds that should have been rated triple B minus are instead rated triple A. Triple A plus, triple A minus, it really doesn't matter. And the other problem with the ratings agencies, aside to being compromised, is the fact that it was sort of a closed-end oligopoly, mostly dominated by Moody's and Standard & Poor's, and Fitch is sort of a lagging third party, and a few others. The point is, without having a more robust competition, or without having a credible ratings agency out there giving more accurate ratings, not only were things compromised, it was to the point where people literally had blinders on. Now, as you'll read this week, in The Big Short, Michael Lewis discusses how some of the major short sellers were talking with these ratings agencies people. Some of them knew what was going on. One woman described how she would send a list of 100 mortgage-backed securities to be downgraded, and her superiors would come back with a much, much shorter list. After all, if something bad's going to happen, it kind of makes sense just to downplay it. That way you can kind of keep the shell game going. You can keep the illusion going. You can keep the fraud going, which is exactly what was happening toward the end in the securities derivatives market, which of course eventually blew up big time and paid off handsomely for the shorts. Now, when she was mentioning that to these people, she thought they were going long on housing, and they were just asking a few little risk management questions. But some of the other people that these gentlemen asked, well, they weren't as forthcoming. Frankly, they weren't as knowledgeable. They didn't understand what they were rating. They didn't understand that what they were rating was made up of hundreds of little pieces of other things that they had previously rated at much lower levels. And of course, in addition to being compromised, as I've said before, it's the fact that it's not just the ratings agencies that have problems. It's also the investment banks who know that the ratings agencies are consistently overrating what these products should be. Take, for instance, Goldman Sachs. Now, last week the SEC finally grew a pair and decided, hey, we should probably look into what these guys were doing. And not only that, we kind of have this idea that they knew that they were peddling some substandard mortgage products, all in the name of being able to increase the bottom line. Well, that's too little too late as far as the SEC is concerned. That's been done. It's over. I'm a little more forward-looking in that, and hopefully you are too. But at the end of the day, there is a third wave coming. After the first wave, which was the buildup in excess credit, the housing boom, the mortgage-backed securities debacle, that inflation, we had sort of a nice, brief, second major burst of that bubble. Major panic ensued, markets corrected, a lot of weaker players and subprime mortgages went completely off the table, the big banks got bailed out. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of these problems are still out there, and all that's happened is that they've been swept under the rug. So let's face it, there's a reason why I'm skeptical about where markets have been going in the past few months. Even though my service has only been out for about 7 months now, and markets have continued to rally, the slope of that rally has started to moderate. It hasn't been as steep. Things are starting to level off. Investors are worried. Mutual fund cash levels remain near all-time lows, meaning there's hardly any more money to throw into this market. What's keeping the market rising? The same thing that was keeping it rising a few years back. The illusion that things are better off than they actually are. So all I'm asking for you is to take a look the rest of this week at our other videos, other articles. Decide for yourself how much of a skeptic you want to be. My service is designed for you as a skeptic, to hedge against whatever the market may be doing, and more specifically, to find incredibly weak companies, to zero in on them, and hope to profit when they finally decide that, hey, all those problems we've been masking can't be masked any longer, and it's time for bankruptcy. So where does that lead us today? Well, it's simple. Stay skeptical. Take a look at going short. I'm putting together the finishing touches on a report in the next few days. It will be out soon for you who have opted in, detailing the next act in the financial crisis on the macro level. We'll be looking at the potential for sovereign defaults across the globe. And after all, there were some sovereign defaults that have already slipped by. You may have remembered Greece. It's been in the headlines in the past few weeks. But they've defaulted several times before. And they were doing the exact same thing as sort of the ratings agencies were. They were hiding the amount of debt that they had to get into the European Union. And that worked for a while for them. They got the stability of the euro as a currency. But the one problem with that is now they're tied to the euro. And that means that Greek bonds are now seeing their yields soar. Investors have lost a little bit of faith in the euro, but Greece is such a small part of the European Union's GDP that it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. But there's a lot more Greeces out there, just like last year's little Dubai snafu. Or even a few years ago, Iceland, which is once again in the news for making a bit of a mess in Europe. So until next time, follow the short path to profits and stay skeptical out there.